Okay, so I have seen The Final Reckoning a second time now, and even though I rarely do this, I thought it would be worthwhile to sit down and make a video solely devoted to talking spoilers with this movie, because there are a lot of things that bothered me the first time around that bothered me less the second time, things that bothered me more the second time, and generally speaking, the things that I really liked when I watched it first, I liked even more now. So let's get right down to business. I think being able to expect that the first hour was going to be slow and choppy, I was able to absorb a lot more of it and try to sort through the clutter to find great little moments in what is obviously a very self-referential, deeply nostalgic portion of the movie. Now, that first hour remains choppy and inconsistent, but there's a lot of good stuff in here that I think people aren't realizing. It's not as simple as first hour bad, second and third hour good. I like the little montage that we get in the opening sequence that shows all of the things that Ethan has done over the course of these 8 films. I think Luther's death is extremely effective in setting the film off with a real spark. Ethan has that great conversation on the plane with Briggs about his connection to the past and how there's going to be a final reckoning between these two characters by the end. And I love that. I think it gives Briggs more of a purpose, whereas in the last movie he was just kind of a secondary antagonist to chase after Ethan every once in a while once a set piece has gone on long enough. With that said, so much is thrown at us in this first hour that it's almost kind of absurd. I wasn't counting the time specifically, but I'm pretty sure in the first 20 minutes or so we visit 3 different countries. There's a lot of nonsensical exposition that is being dropped repeatedly. Like, I can't think of another movie that explains the same thing to the audience multiple times through its runtime. And then there's also that horrendous sequence in which Ethan communicates with the entity by climbing in that box and putting the mask on. I'm just not a fan of personifying the entity. I think that cheapens how intelligent it's supposed to be. Also, this is another small detail, but when did Luther get sick? You know, we see him with a nasal cannula in, he's on an IV drip. I don't remember them ever mentioning how the dude got sick, and I feel like that's kind of a big part of what happens to him and what leads to his fate. Another problem that did carry over through this second viewing is that there are 3 or 4 characters on the team who get next to no development. I still find myself disappointed that they didn't expand on Gabriel's backstory at all. Who was the woman that he killed in Ethan's past and brought him on his path to the IMF? I feel like that's useful information, and getting some flashbacks to that would have been fitting for this movie. Other characters, like the one played by Hannah Waddingham, feels totally shoehorned in, but for whatever reason, on the second viewing, as soon as Ethan entered that sub, I was back to being locked in, and the set pieces in this film are too amazing for me to let some of the other problems drag it down too much. It does bug me that there's at least 10 minutes devoted to explaining why Ethan needs this special suit for the dive and how he has to ascend and descend slowly to acclimate his body. And apparently if he holds his breath, his lungs will explode. Then we get the subsequence, and not only does he ditch the suit as he leaves the Sevastopol without freezing to death in the Arctic waters, but he also swims like 100 to 200 feet to the surface, presumably while holding his breath, and he doesn't die. And yes, I know that they have the inflatable hyperbaric chamber to put him in once he ascends, but I think the damage would have been done by that point. They literally had to make Ethan superhuman in order for him to survive this sequence. And what I'm getting at here is that this franchise has always walked a fine line between characters surviving against insurmountable odds simply because they're so good at their jobs that you believe them being able to do these things. But this is the first time that I've genuinely felt that you would need to be superhuman in order to survive one of these stunts. Don't get me wrong, the Sevastopol scene is still an incredible set piece and an awesome sequence with tons of nail-biting tension, especially when he does cut the suit off and climb into that tiny tunnel that he has to crawl through. Really claustrophobic stuff, and I was able to appreciate so much more about it on second viewing. You know, before I move on from the subsequence, I should say that, and this just popped into my head a minute ago, the movie does have some self-awareness when it comes to the absurdity of the sequence. Tramell Tillman's character, who I think got a lot of great laughs out of the audience, he has one line in the movie that pretty much is just conveying what the audience is thinking, where he's like, "So what exactly is your plan?" He also points out how ridiculous it is that Ethan jumped out of the carrier into the freezing cold waters just on the off chance that the sub listened to the message and rose to the surface to pick him up. All right, let's move on from talking about that to discussing the president, her entire conundrum, which to me was not very interesting the first time around. And maybe I just wasn't paying enough attention the first time to really pick up on how fascinating this is. But we're told that the entity is taking over the 8 largest nuclear arsenals on the planet, right? And once it controls all 8 of them, it's most likely going to fire. Although it is kind of convenient that the United States becomes the last country to remain in control, it's interesting to think about what Angela Bassett's character is trying to decide between. You know, do I launch and try to destroy these other sites before the entity gains control? Or do I do, I suppose, the ethical thing and make no action at all and just hope that Ethan Hunt can pull off this impossible plan of his? With that said, I have no idea why she decides to bomb one of our own US cities in addition to these 7 other sites, as if that's going to prevent global war. Yeah, sorry we're bombing millions of your citizens, but it's okay because we're taking out Chicago too. The last thing I want to talk about in terms of logical issues is Ethan's magic parachutes. It's just so weird to me that they misdirected the audience by having a big character's final words be, "I have the only parachute," only for him to not be the only one with a parachute. It almost makes me wonder if Ethan was meant to die in the original cut and then Tom Cruise decided he actually wants to do more Mission Impossible, and the writers were like, okay, we'll leave that door open for you. But the more I think about this final set piece, it is truly Tom Cruise's magnum opus. I don't think there is a more impressive stunt in this entire run of 8 films. I can't think of one. And the only one that comes close, I suppose, is the helicopter stuff in Fallout, which people have compared this to and said that this is just basically a recreation of that stunt. And I disagree. I think the sequence is longer in The Final Reckoning. At least the amount of time that Tom Cruise spends in this precarious situation is longer, if you were to actually count it by the minute, than it is in Fallout. Ultimately, I hate to be vague about it, but I think there are things that I liked more watching it the second time, and there are things that bothered me more than they did the first time. With that said, I am going to amend my score up to 3.5 stars. I still think it has a lot of problems, and it's one of the weaker entries in this franchise, but I can't deny the sheer amount of spectacle, and I had to sit back to myself and think, who else, in terms of a director and an actor working together, is capable of delivering an experience like Mission Impossible these days? There's no one. There's no one out there doing what Christopher McQuarrie and Tom Cruise have done here. So this video probably felt very scattershot, and I was just talking and rambling about random things that I was thinking about when watching the film. But it is what it is. I hope you guys enjoyed watching it. If you want to leave your spoiler-filled thoughts down in the comments, be sure to do so, and stay tuned for the next video. I'll catch you guys later.